first-class seat vibrated ever so slightly as Ethan Carter felt the first hateful stare lock onto him from only a few steps away. In the span of 2 breaths, the entire first-class cabin turned into a stage for a truth he had hoped he would never have to witness again. But it was happening right now, right in front of him. The soft hum of the air vents swirled through the cabin like a whisper, too faint to decipher, while the crisp rustle of a newspaper from the neighboring seat sliced through his pride like tiny blades against a man who had spent a lifetime climbing to a position people still believed he did not deserve. Ethan let his shoulders loosen, trying to control his breathing, but inside a coldness spread like a thin sheet of ice crawling through his veins. It was terrifyingly familiar, the feeling of years spent being undervalued, doubted, and seen through a fogged lens, thick with prejudice. And today, as he prepared to fly to Seattle to present a project that could transform the entire regional aviation industry, the past returned, striking him in its most recognizable form. The white man in seat 2, B. Andrew Collin, tightened the strap of his expensive watch as if gripping a weapon no one else could see. He glanced at Ethan again, his eyes sluggish, yet filled with clear irritation. But this time, Andrew did not simply look and turn away. He leaned over to whisper into another passenger's ear, his lips moving quickly and low, but the toxic intent leaked through every tiny sound. Ethan could not hear his words, but he noticed every shift in the second man's expression. Agreement? Compliance. Confirmation that a problem was sitting right here in seat 2A, the seat Ethan had every right to occupy, to be respected in, and to be treated like any other fully paying passenger. Ethan lifted his chin, slightly scanning the cabin. Other passengers had started watching him in secret. Some looked uneasy, others appeared almost pleased. They were waiting for the spark, waiting to see what would be handled, as if Ethan were not a human being, but a disturbance that needed to be removed from this pristine little world. When the young flight attendant Megan Snow approached, her original smile had vanished. It had been replaced with a neutral mask, the kind worn by people who had received orders. She spoke quietly to Andrew, her gaze accidentally brushing across Ethan, and in that fleeting moment, he caught the fear, or worse, the resignation. She knew this was wrong, but she would still participate. Finally, the first-class supervisor Dennis Ward arrived, walking toward him with slow, deliberate steps. The atmosphere thickened, the murmurs dissolved into a heavy silence that felt like a steel door slamming shut. "Sir, I need you to gather your things and come with us." Ethan looked up, tilting his head slightly, his eyes calm and steady, though his heart pounded so hard it felt like every vein was about to burst. "Reason?" he asked, his voice, even clear, not a tremor in it. Dennis swallowed, struggling to keep his tone neutral. "There has been a serious complaint. We need to address it on the ground." A complaint. What complaint Ethan had flown countless times, had stayed composed through pressures far greater than this. But Dennis's words were not a report. They were a verdict. And Ethan knew it. The entire cabin held its breath. Ethan had 2 choices: explode and be labeled aggressive, or walk out quietly and swallow the humiliation the same way he had so many times before. Neither option was fair. He inhaled deeply, then slowly closed his laptop. "I will leave," he said, the words landing softly, but carrying the weight of a lifetime of effort, dismissed simply because his presence made someone uncomfortable. He rose each step, dragging along a long trail of memories he wished he had left buried. Andrew Collins' eyes lit up just a little as if he had won a battle he never had the right to start. But Ethan didn't look at him. He didn't need to. He knew men like Andrew far too well. As Ethan stepped out of the cabin, the thing that hurt more than the insult itself was the familiarity. Those stares, those judgments, that crushing sense of being seen as someone who did not belong. He thought he had left that behind. But the past had never left him. When the aircraft door closed behind him, Ethan realized something. This story would not end like all the others. Not because he had been the victim of blatant discrimination, but because this time he was someone with the power to change the entire game. In the long hallway leading back to the gate, Ethan paused for half a second, drew a slow breath, and made a decision, one no one would be able to stop. Today they removed him from a seat. Tomorrow he would remove the entire system that created this moment. The meeting room on the 52nd floor of Pinecrest Tower gleamed under the sweeping wall of glass, but the brilliance did nothing to chase away the cold, seeping into every corner, a cold not from the air conditioning, but from the quiet, measuring stares of those who believed they had the right to judge a man. Ethan Carter sat at the head of the table, his charcoal grey suit fitting neatly across broad shoulders, the image of a successful executive. Yet the shadow he felt pressing against him was not cast by Manhattan's skyscrapers, but by the doubt hovering from the opposite side of the table. Richard Barnes, 62 years old, white hair slicked back with the shine of inherited pride, adjusted his glasses and glanced down at the documents Ethan had spent months preparing. This project is ambitious. The word ambitious slipped out softly like paper, but struck Ethan's ears with the weight of stone. He had heard variations of that word too many times. Strange, unusual, interesting, unrealistic. All different masks hiding the same truth, their doubt in his ability, even after he had proven himself hundreds of times beyond the standards they quietly imposed on him. Jonathan Weaver, 48, younger but sharper, folded his arms and leaned back, like a man ready to deliver the decisive blow. We have seen many clean energy ideas fail. What makes you think yours is different? Ethan pressed his lips together, steadying his voice, as if responding to a neutral question rather than one laced with the same old prejudice. My solar cell technology reduces production costs by 42%. 3 major utility companies have signed letters expressing their commitment to purchase. Commitment is not a contract Jonathan cut in a thin, sharp blade disguised beneath the polished language of business. A quiet disappointment coiled beneath Ethan's ribs, not because of the rudeness, but because of the repetition. He had lived this meeting countless times, each one in a different boardroom, with different faces, but the same script. They praised his intelligence, praised his clear presentation, then claimed they needed more time to evaluate. That time would stretch into forever ending, in an email politely declining and wishing him luck on future ventures. They never said outright that they did not believe in him. But he always knew. Through the reflection in the glass, Ethan saw himself, a 45-year-old man, accomplished and composed, yet behind his eyes lay something no one else could see. The exhaustion built from 100 invisible battles. He turned back to the table, placed his hands down gently, and spoke more slowly to keep his emotions contained. I do not think I am different. I have data to prove my claims. He continued outlining the molecular structure of the new photovoltaic material, the independent tests, the market projections. But he could see it already. Nothing, he said, mattered anymore. Their decision had been made the moment he walked into the room. Richard closed the folder with polite finality, as gently as shutting the door on an opportunity Ethan had poured everything into. We will discuss internally and respond in 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Ethan almost laughed, but he stopped himself. 2 weeks meant never. 2 weeks meant long enough for them to construct a reason to reject him without appearing biased. He stood, shook each hand, thanked them for their time, performing a ritual he knew so well he could do it with his eyes closed. But when the conference room door shut behind him and he stepped alone into the elevator, the calm he had maintained drained out all at once, leaving an ache hollowing out his chest. Floor 52 slipped to 51, then 50, then 49, each passing level echoing another moment when he had been doubted, underestimated, deemed not a fit. Even though any white man his age with the same achievements would have been celebrated as a visionary. The elevator stopped at floor 33 as his phone buzzed. A message from Emily, his daughter, 22, earning her MBA at Wharton. "Dad, how was the meeting?" Ethan stared at the text, his fingers hovering. He could tell her the truth, that he had been dismissed before he even began, that they did not see him at all, only the label they attached the moment they saw the color of his skin. But he would not place that weight on her, not today. It was fine, still waiting for their response. "How are your classes going?" When the elevator doors opened into the lobby, the sunlight hit his face like a pull back into reality. He caught his reflection on the polished marble floor, flawless suit, composed posture, the appearance of a man who had everything. But only he knew that beneath the fabric was a warrior who had been forced to fight for far too long. And even the strongest warriors grow tired. He stepped onto the sidewalk, the taxi horns, the click of shoes on pavement, the shouts of people calling to one another, blending into the Manhattan symphony of ambition and indifference. Yet amid the chaos, Ethan paused, only for one beat, but long enough for a decision to form. If the door in front of him kept closing, he would break through the wall instead. His phone buzzed again. Carmen Ellis calling, her voice urgent, but never frantic, the kind of tone Ethan recognized as a warning that something big was coming. "Ethan, you need to get back to the office now. Summit Financial is urgently offloading shares of Skyrise Aviation Group. This is an opportunity you do not want to miss." A strong gust tore down the avenue. Ethan closed his eyes for 1 second, and for the first time in weeks he felt a flame ignite inside his chest again. Not anger, but something far larger. A new door, a new direction no one could block him from taking. He opened his eyes, his voice low and solid. "Tell everyone to be ready. Today we start something no one will see coming." And from that moment, everything began to shift slowly, at first, then faster, then into a storm that would change the entire aviation industry and transform the course of his life. The taxi screeched to a stop in front of Carter Holdings, and Ethan stepped out before the car had fully settled. His heartbeat climbed with each long stride through the lobby, where employees instinctively moved aside, sensing the tension radiating from him. He was not angry, not panicked. He was focused at a level where his entire body felt like a machine, programmed for a single objective. When the elevator opened on the 34th floor, Carmen Ellis was already weighting her tablet, glowing with rows of data marked in sharp red, the color of financial collapse spreading as fast as a wildfire. Summit Financial dropped 19% in value this morning, Carmen said immediately, wasting no words and not letting Ethan lose a single second. They are liquidating assets, and Skyrise Aviation's shares are in the priority group for disposal. Ethan gave a slight nod and moved quickly into the conference room where the analysis team sat around the table, papers and charts scattered like a battlefield. Every eye turned to him with a mix of hope and fear. He took his position at the head of the table, drew a steady breath, and dove into the data, like a diver plunging to the ocean floor in search of gold. And that was exactly what he found. Beneath the chaos, a golden opportunity waited. Skyrise Aviation Group owned 5 regional airlines: Northjet, Blue West, Frontier Lake Silver Coast, and Mountain Air. The group's assets included more than 260 aircraft, 12,000 employees, and more than $1.6 billion in annual revenue. But weak management, an aging fleet, and conservative strategy had dragged its valuation far below its true worth. Ethan did not look away from the analysis. How much are they asking for 47% of the shares? 230 million, Carmen replied. Ethan did not smile, but his eyes sharpened like a freshly honed blade. They are desperate, aren't they? Yes. They need liquidity within 3 weeks to avoid cascading defaults. Ethan rose abruptly and walked toward the window, looking down at the city flowing beneath him like molten ambition. He felt the pulse of opportunity, strong and undeniable. Set up a call with Summit's CEO. Within 30 minutes. The call came soon after. Gerald Morrison's voice filled the room's speaker system, a tone pretending to remain calm, yet trembling like glass before a storm. Ethan, I heard Carter Holdings is interested in acquiring Skyrise shares. I am interested, Ethan replied curtly. But not at 230 million. Silence stretched long enough to feel like the man on the other side was trying to swallow a handful of gravel. What number do you propose? Ethan spoke slowly, each word dropping like ice. 185 million. In cash. Closed within 3 weeks. The room froze. Ethan could almost hear Morrison choke back a mix of panic and pride. That is below market value. No, Ethan said. That is the price of desperation. Another silence followed, deeper and heavier. You should reconsider, Morrison said, his voice tight. Ethan tilted his head, closed his eyes for half a second, then opened them sharp enough to slice the air. I do not reconsider. This is the only offer, and you know no one else can close this deal as fast as I can. Ethan muted the speaker and looked around the table. They will call back. And just as he predicted, fewer than 48 hours later, Carmen's phone lit up. Morrison accepted 190 million, the final concession of a man with no options left. Ethan responded with only 2 words. Sign it. And so the takeover began. The next 3 weeks became a whirlwind of data, closed-door negotiations, legal audits, operational assessments, and nights when Ethan fell asleep at the conference table beside financial forecast models, tangled like spiderwebs. The audit teams uncovered harsh truths. Northjet's fleet included 37 Embraer aircraft with severely overdue maintenance. Blue West had the highest delay rate in the entire Southeast. Frontier Lake operated efficiently, but was suffocated by budget cuts. Silver Coast had an excellent pilot team, but disastrous maintenance facilities. Mountain Air lacked any strategic vision at all. But Ethan was not afraid of weaknesses. He saw what others never could potential. Potential buried under outdated leadership potential, waiting for someone bold enough to gamble on it. One night with the conference room lit only by the glow of active screens, Carmen leaned against the doorframe, watching Ethan sketch arrows, circles, and notes all over the whiteboard. Ethan, she said softly, you know this is not like your past deals. Aviation is far more complicated. Ethan paused, turned around. His face held no uncertainty, only the fire Carmen had seen in him for 15 years. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Yes," Ethan answered honestly. "But fear does not mean we walk away from opportunity." He moved toward the dark window, where New York's lights shimmered across the glass, like thousands of reminders that the world belonged to those willing to leap into waters others avoided. "They think I will invest only in technology and real estate, in things that fit the picture they have decided for me," he said, lowering his voice. "It is time to break that mold." The signing day arrived on a dull morning, the sky painted in silver gray, as if foreshadowing something monumental. When Morrison signed the final page, his hand trembled, not only from losing his company, but because he saw in Ethan's eyes a certainty that chilled him, the certainty of a man who knew he was about to transform an entire industry. When the contract closed and the $190 million transfer was completed, Ethan stood alone in the vast conference room, the only sound the steady hum of the air system. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. In that breath lay a new chapter, a chapter whose ending he could not yet see. But he knew one thing: nothing could stop him anymore. No door could close in his face. No system could ignore him. Because from this moment on, Ethan Carter officially owned 5 airlines, and with only a single opportunity, he would change the sky itself. On the first morning, after the $190 million acquisition was signed, Ethan Carter stepped into the new headquarters of Skyrise Aviation Group, feeling as though he had entered the body of a giant that had been asleep for far too long. The air carried the smell of old paper, the pale neon lights flickered with fatigue, and the beige walls radiated a quiet surrender. It was the portrait of a corporation that no longer believed in itself. But that was exactly why Ethan had chosen to be here, not to stand atop a polished empire, but to revive a dying one. That very day, he summoned a meeting with the entire former leadership team of Skyrise, a row of faces, all white, all aging, all tired, still clinging to an appearance of authority. They did not look at him as the new owner, but as an outsider, someone who did not understand aviation and was destined to fail. Ethan stood before them and opened the one document he had brought, an evaluation his analysis team at Carter Holdings had spent 21 sleepless days building. Then he began speaking. No embellishment, no softening, no hiding. In the past 5 years, Ethan said, his voice low, firm, and allowing no interruption, Skyrise has lost 24% of its market share, stalled. Its fleet upgrades missed 17 strategic partnership opportunities, and watched customer satisfaction fall to the worst in the region. The faces across from him tightened. Some frowned. Some exchanged nervous glances, searching for reassurance in each other's eyes. Ethan continued without pause. I did not buy Skyrise to maintain this outdated state. I bought it to rebuild. At that moment, he saw 2 unmistakable things in their eyes, fear and resistance. Then he delivered the first strike. As of today, the old board of directors is dissolved. All of it. The room fell into a silence so heavy that the sound of a pen hitting the table seemed deafening. An older man with silver hair, Harold Collins, the chairman for 12 years, slammed his hand on the desk. What do you think you are turning this system into? You have never run an airline in your life. Ethan met his glare with calm, unwavering eyes. Yet I am the one who managed to buy it. Harold's face flushed red, but he had no answer. Ethan continued. And as the owner, It is my responsibility to put Skyrise back on course. Anyone who wants to join me in doing that, stay. Anyone who does not, I thank you for your service." Silence swept the room like a falling curtain. No more objections. Some stared at the table. Some stared at the door. Some looked at Ethan as if realizing for the first time that he was not a man who stepped over boundaries, but a man who broke through walls. And so day one ended with the departure of 7 former board members. No arguments, no bargaining, only the clear confirmation that the old era had ended. That same afternoon, Ethan convened the new leadership team, people he trusted. Elena Vasquez entered with the sharp presence of a woman who had once transformed a South American airline into the standard of customer service excellence. Dr. Raymond Choi brought with him a technological mind capable of detecting system failures before they happened. Quincy Harris, former union president, understood the emotions of every employee from pilots to cleaners. Thomas Barlow, a man with 35 years in aviation, had worked every job from ground handling to fleet management, a living encyclopedia of airline operations. These were nothing like the old leadership team. They were energetic, forward-thinking, and believed in people more than numbers. Ethan began their meeting with 3 words: "We rebuild everything." Then he laid out the blueprint fleet renewal service overhaul staff, retraining facility modernization, a new culture, and a complete reinvention of the customer experience from check-in to landing. The eyes around the table no longer held doubt, but anticipation. "I do not want Skyrise to compete only with regional carriers," Ethan said. "I want us to become the standard of the industry." Elena smiled the smile of someone standing at the foot of a mountain, but ready to climb. "You just set a goal that gives most CEOs heartburn," she said. Ethan replied, "Good." Then the meeting unfolded like a military campaign. Thomas presented a list of outdated aircraft that needed immediate retirement. Raymond demonstrated a reservation system upgrade that could reduce transaction errors by 43%. Quincy outlined a compensation and benefits strategy to reduce staff turnover. Elena proposed a complete redesign of service procedures to turn every flight into a memorable experience. Ethan wrote down every point, every idea, every metric. But in his mind, the picture had already formed a different sky, a new standard, a path no one believed a regional group could reach. The meeting lasted until evening. When the team finally left, Carmen remained silently observing the project plans covering the walls, the red markings glowing like airport warning lights. "Ethan," she said softly, "are you sure you want this path? This is not just change. This is a war against the entire industry's old ways." Ethan looked out through the window where the city lights shimmered like a trapped artificial sky. "Carmen," he said, "my whole life I have fought in a battle I never chose. This time let me choose the battlefield." She smiled faintly, not from relief but from recognizing that Ethan had crossed into a new threshold. He was no longer just an investor or a CEO. He had become someone determined to rewrite the rules. That night, Ethan was the last to leave headquarters. He turned off the lights in the conference room and stepped into the quiet hallway, feeling as though he were walking through the hollow interior of a giant aircraft. An aircraft that had waited far too long for someone bold enough to guide it toward the sun. As the elevator doors closed before him, Ethan whispered a single line, not a prayer, but a promise. Skyrise will soar higher than ever. He did not yet know that this promise would lead him to the most painful moment of his life, the moment on Flight 227 6 weeks later. But it was also the promise that would ignite an aviation revolution no one had ever imagined. That morning when Ethan Carter landed at Jacksonville Airport for his first inspection trip at NorthJet, a thin layer of mist still blurred the usual bustle of a major aviation hub. But inside him, the atmosphere was completely different, sharp, vivid, and alive, like hundreds of jet engines running at once. This was not a visit to introduce the new owner. This was a mission to touch the heart of a system that had long decayed, to see whether it still had enough pulse left to revive. No announcement, no ceremony, no ribbon cutting. Ethan walked straight into NorthJet headquarters, where peeling grey walls, faded posters, and second-rate office furniture told a very clear story no one had invested in this place for many years. There was only one person at the reception desk, a young woman named Katie, whose eyes carried exhaustion, even though she tried to maintain a polite smile. "I want to meet Patrick Donovan," Ethan said. Katie startled. "Mr. Donovan, the CEO. Do you have an appointment?" "No," Ethan replied, calm but commanding. She widened her eyes when she read the name on his badge. "Oh, you're the new CEO of Skyrise, correct?" She nearly dropped her pen. Finally, she pointed toward a long hallway leading to the operations center, her voice trembling slightly with respect. "Go straight then. Turn left. Operations room at the end." Ethan nodded and continued forward. The hallway was so empty that his footsteps echoed, blending with the smell of stale dust and coffee gone cold hours ago. Nothing here resembled an airline operating nearly 200 flights a day. It felt more like an abandoned administrative office. But when the operations room door opened, the soundscape shifted entirely. Radio chatter, rapid keystrokes, and tense exchanges between coordinators monitoring each flight across dozens of large screens. It was a living atmosphere, exhausted but alive, like a heart straining to keep the body stable one beat at a time. Patrick Donovan, the man Ethan had studied meticulously in reports, stood in front of the main screen, scribbling notes on a whiteboard, his expression tight like a stretched wire. He turned at the sound of the door surprise flickering across his face before clarity settled. "Mr. Carter." He extended his hand, firm, no flattery, no performance. "I did not expect you to show up this immediately," Ethan answered. "I want to see everything exactly as it is without preparation." Patrick let out a soft, weary laugh. "Then you came to the right place." Ethan looked around and instantly sensed what he had suspected all along. This team did not lack ability. They lacked investment. They lacked authority to act, and they lacked someone at the top with enough courage to say, "We cannot keep doing things the old way." Patrick Ethan said directly, "Tell me what is NorthJet's biggest challenge?" Not the nice answer. The real one. Patrick exhaled like releasing a stone that had crushed his chest for years. "The fleet is falling apart. Some aircraft we patch up 3 times a week. Budget approvals are slow. Everything requires permission from the old board, and they refuse to spend a cent more. Service procedures have not changed in 12 years. Staff quit so often we had to shorten training just to fill positions." Ethan clenched his jaw slightly. Each sentence was a blade, cutting into the pride of a man who had just spent nearly $200 million acquiring this entire system. "Customers?" Ethan asked. Patrick shrugged. "They fly with us because we are cheap. Not because of the experience, not because they trust us." Ethan stepped closer to the central console, watching the constant stream of updates. Delay 15 minutes, delay 28 minutes, additional maintenance required, ticket counter, understaffed at Tallahassee, 3 flight attendants calling in last minute. All symptoms of a long-standing illness, an illness he needed to cure at its root. If you had full authority, Ethan asked, what would you change? First, Patrick looked at him, hesitating slightly, as though testing whether Ethan truly wanted the truth. When he saw unwavering determination in Ethan's expression, he answered, I would replace the 40 oldest aircraft. I would raise salaries. I would retrain everyone. I would improve the seats. I would invest in support systems. I would make passengers feel respected instead of being shoved onto a plane. Ethan allowed a small smile, the first hint of warmth on his face, all day. Then do it. Patrick's eyes widened. Do it now. I did not buy Skyrise to continue cost-cutting, Ethan said, his voice hardening. I bought it to upgrade. Those words blew into the room like a gust of fresh air. A coordinator in the back lifted his head, eyes brightening. A maintenance technician nearby stopped what he was doing to listen. Patrick blinked his voice, trembling, slightly shocked, that after so many years, someone at the top finally understood. Are you serious? Ethan nodded. Make the list. Detailed. I will sign. And just like that, the inspection turned into a lightning-fast revolution. Ethan moved through every department at the maintenance center, where crews used tools older than some of the aircraft, the training room, where safety videos still ran at 480p or resolution, the crew lounge with broken chairs, wobbly tables, and peeling paint on the walls. In every room he entered, employees' expressions shifted from indifference to curiosity, and then to hope. Hope something Skyrise had lost long ago. When Ethan returned to the operations room, Patrick had already prepared the full proposal: fleet renewal, pay raises, service restructuring system, modernization, hiring more technicians, and designing a new employee retention program. Ethan reviewed each page, signing each item without hesitation. Patrick, he said, placing a hand on the man's shoulder, from today onward, you have full authority to upgrade NorthJet. I will handle the budget. Patrick looked at him, the eyes of a man with more than 30 years in the industry, suddenly glistening. Mr. Carter, no one has ever believed in us like this, Ethan replied, voice deep, steady, and carrying unmistakable responsibility. I am not believing in you. I am believing in our potential. And in that moment, Ethan did not notice the small group of employees or standing afar watching him like someone who had just reignited a system on the verge of collapse. A group who would soon become the most loyal force behind the reform, known as the Ethan Carter era. A group who would remember this day as the day Skyrise came back to life. And Ethan also did not know that these very people would later become the ones defending his name after the devastating incident on flight 227 weeks later. But that would be a story for another day. Today, in that buzzing operations room, filled with revived eyes and renewed energy, Ethan knew with absolute clarity that his revolution had officially taken flight. In the days following his inspection at NorthJet, Ethan Carter plunged into a whirlwind of work, unlike anything he had ever experienced, as if his entire life had been preparing him for this moment. The airlines within the Skyrise system were no longer names on a report. They had become pieces of a puzzle, waiting for someone determined, bold, and deeply human to fit them into a complete picture. The moment he left Jacksonville, Ethan flew to Blue West headquarters in Dallas. No warning. No media announcement. No grand entourage. Just him, a briefcase, and an unshakable resolve. Blue West headquarters looked more modern than NorthJet, but only from the outside. Beyond the gleaming Texas sun, reflected on the glass walls, were offices strained to the breaking point, staffed by employees trying to operate a system that was far too overloaded and far too old. When Ethan stepped into the flight attendant training room, he saw nearly 40 people crowded together, watching a training video recorded 14 years earlier. The footage was blurry, the audio crackling, the content outdated to the point of not even meeting the minimum standards of the current airline industry. A young flight attendant, about 25 years old, leaned toward her friend and whispered, "I do not know how they plan to improve anything, but I am sure nothing is going to change." Ethan stood in the doorway and heard every word. He stepped inside the screen's glow, outlining his face with a sharp halo of light. The room fell silent, as if frozen mid-breath. "I hope," Ethan said, his voice deep and carrying through the room, "that when we come back here next month, none of you will have to watch these videos again." A few eyes widened. A few nearly laughed, thinking he was joking. But when they realized the man speaking was the new owner, their smiles faded into stunned disbelief. A young woman stood up her hand, trembling slightly. I am Ethan Carter," he said, "and I am here to ensure you have every tool you need to work with pride rather than exhaustion." The silence shifted. No longer confusion, but awakening. The meeting lasted only 20 minutes, but when Ethan left the room, he knew he had planted a seed, not of expectation, but of belief. From Blue West, Ethan continued to Frontier Lake in Denver, then Silver Coast in Phoenix, and finally Mountain Air in Salt Lake City. Each trip swept another layer of dust off a system that had gone ignored for far too long. He walked into Frontier Lake's operations center and found 18 coordinators managing 42 flights with software so outdated it still ran on an operating system abandoned by tech companies 3 years earlier. One coordinator broke into tears when a system error forced her to re-enter all the flight data from scratch. Ethan stood behind her quietly, watching the blinking numbers on the screen, numbers that should have been handled by technology, not by tears. Only one sentence from him changed the entire room. "We are deleting this entire system. In 8 weeks, all of you will be operating on the newest software available." A senior coordinator on the left side of the room spoke up, his eyes red yet proud. "Mr. Carter, we have waited 10 years to hear that." Ethan nodded. "You should never have had to wait that long." And so everywhere he went, he saw the same things: exhausted, yet dedicated staff, outdated facilities, still holding potential, and a system buried by leaders who believed good enough was enough. The first major meeting with all 6 CEOs of the 6 airlines took place a week later. They sat around a long walnut conference table inside Skyrise's boardroom, the warm golden lights reflecting across the polished surface. Like pathways they were about to walk, steep and unavoidable. Ethan looked at each of them, not with the eyes of a superior judging subordinates, but with the focus of a general evaluating the allies who would join him in the greatest campaign of his life. "I have visited 5 airlines," Ethan began, "and I saw one truth. You all have excellent teams, but you are being held down by terrible systems." A young CEO, Anderson Hale of Frontier Lake, thought for a moment before speaking. "Sir, if we upgrade everything you mentioned, the cost will be enormous." "Not a few million. A few $100 million. I know," Ethan replied immediately, "and I am prepared." The room went silent. No one spoke. No one expected a 45-year-old black investor to commit hundreds of millions of dollars to rebuilding an aviation empire most people in the industry believed was beyond saving. Ethan rose, placed his hands on the table, and leaned forward slightly. "I didn't buy Skyrise for quick profit. I bought it to prove that regional aviation can be as good as any major airline. I bought it to set a new standard. And I bought it so people like you, who have spent your lives serving this industry, can finally be proud of your work." Several people inhaled sharply. Some looked down at the table, hiding emotion. Others stared at Ethan with admiration burning in their eyes. Ethan continued. "So from now on, we begin a new program, the Skyrise Transformation Initiative." He listed each item: fleet renewal, salary increases, new service, training, technology, upgrades, lounge improvements, cabin upgrades, brand identity development, internal culture change. Difficult, risky, expensive, but right. And then Ethan said the sentence that shook the entire room: "I do not want Skyrise to simply improve. I want Skyrise to become the example that forces the entire industry to change." The words rang out like a hammer, striking steel, loud, decisive, and echoing long after. After the 3-hour meeting ended, as everyone filed out, Carmen approached Ethan and handed him a cup of coffee that had cooled slightly. "Ethan, you just lit a fire under 6 airlines," she said, "but fire can burn too." Ethan looked at the cup, then out the glass wall, where the city lights reflected like thousands of passengers waiting for a better flight than yesterday. "Carmen," he said slowly, "sometimes we have to burn the old to see the new sky." He did not know that 6 weeks later, that very sky would test him in a way no CEO on Earth could imagine. But right now, Ethan Carter had begun something no one before him dared to attempt, pulling the aviation industry out of its stagnant darkness and lighting it with belief, humanity, and a determination that could not be extinguished. Skyrise was changing, and no one would pull Ethan away from the sky he was rebuilding. That morning at Jacksonville Airport, Ethan Carter arrived in a deep navy suit, his stance firm, and his eyes bright as if today were the day he would sign a historic deal. And in truth it was. He was about to fly to Seattle to meet Boeing executives to discuss the possibility of ordering 30 new Embraer E190 aircraft, a move that could elevate Skyrise to a level no regional airline had ever reached. But what Ethan did not know was that Flight 227 would not carry him toward opportunity. It would carry him straight into the storm that would test everything he had built and test the very dignity he had spent his entire life fighting to protect. Ethan arrived at Gate 12, be 20 minutes early, where the staff were busy scanning boarding passes. A young employee, Tamara Hill, smiled when she saw him. "Mr. Carter, it is such an honor to meet you. Thank you for the salary increase. I can finally afford my daughter's college tuition." Ethan paused for a beat, then offered a warm smile. "I am glad to hear that." "What is your daughter studying? Aerospace engineering," Tamara said proudly. "She wants to design airplanes." "Wonderful. Tell her to apply to our scholarship program." Tamara's face lit up like a runway at night. Ethan boarded the aircraft feeling unusually light, almost uplifted, a rare sensation for someone who lived with the weight of an entire industry on his shoulders. He found seat 2A in the newly upgraded first-class cabin. The wider seats, brighter lighting, and premium leather were all products of the reform he himself had approved. He set down his briefcase and opened his laptop to review the negotiation documents. Everything was smooth, peaceful, as light as a breath. But peace is always brief before a storm. The man in seat 2B arrived minutes later, Andrew Collin, around 60 years old, neatly combed silver hair, an expensive leather jacket, and a gleaming metal watch. Andrew looked at Ethan. The first time was a glance. The second lasted too long. The third turned sharp, cold, and soaked in judgment. Ethan was familiar with this gaze. He had seen it throughout his youth in college, in elevators at his old firm, in boardrooms where million-dollar decisions were made by people who never had to fight for the respect automatically handed to them. But he stayed composed. Not because he was used to it, but because he had risen far above it. Or so he thought. Minutes later, Andrew leaned toward the passenger in seat 3B and whispered something low enough to hide the words, but obvious enough that Ethan knew exactly who they were about. He did not need to hear the name, just that man was enough for everyone to understand. The other passenger glanced at Ethan and nodded. That look, the silent agreement shared by people who believe they have the right to judge. Ethan felt a cold line running down his spine, not from fear, but from familiarity. And no one should ever be familiar with that feeling. A young flight attendant, Megan Snow, passed by. Andrew immediately signaled her over and whispered in her ear. Megan listened, her face tightening. She looked at Ethan, then back at Andrew, then at Ethan again. The hesitation in her eyes hurt more than anything Andrew could have said, because she knew what he was saying was absurd, but she also knew what she would be required to do. Ethan adjusted his laptop, trying to stay calm, but he knew exactly what scene was about to unfold. He only hoped he was wrong. When first-class supervisor Dennis Ward walked in, that hope shattered like a light bulb switching off. Dennis walked straight to the front row, his expression tense underneath a forced politeness. Sir Ethan looked up. "Can you tell me what the issue is?" Dennis stood firm, holding his radio, using the carefully trained tone of corporate courtesy. "There has been a complaint involving you. We need you to gather your belongings and step off the aircraft so we can resolve it on the ground." Whispering spread through the cabin like an invisible wave. Some passengers looked at Ethan with pity, some with a strange satisfaction, some with annoyance at the drama delaying the flight. Ethan kept his voice steady. "What complaint I am in my assigned seat with a valid ticket." Dennis repeated the line Ethan had heard countless times in news reports of passengers dragged off planes. "Sir, I cannot disclose details, but I need your cooperation." Ethan looked into Dennis's eyes and saw the reluctance behind the neutral mask. Dennis did not want to do this, but the old procedure required it. A procedure Ethan had not yet had the chance to change. Humiliation stabbed him like a small, sharp blade. He had two choices: react strongly and be labeled aggressive, or stand up quietly so no one would be dragged down the aisle. In the end, Ethan closed his laptop and rose with all the dignity he had left. He could feel Andrew's eyes on his back, gleeful and cruel. As he stepped off the aircraft, Tim, an older flight attendant, watched him with a mixture of concern, regret, and something like apology. But apologies did not change the fact. Ethan had been removed from a flight he owned. In the jet bridge, 2 airport security officers were waiting. One asked, "Mr. Carter, we need to speak with you regarding disruptive behavior." Ethan looked him directly in the eyes, not shaking, not afraid, only sad. "I did not behave disruptively. I was complained about because the man next to me disliked my existence." The officers exchanged confused glances. Dennis stepped in. "We just need to complete the report." Ethan stopped walking. He drew a deep breath. Then he said the sentence that froze all 3 men in place. "I am Ethan Carter, the owner of Skyrise Aviation Group, and you just escorted me off my own aircraft." Silence hit like a hammer. Dennis went pale. One officer's eyes widened. The other stepped back in shock. A few passengers passing by halted mid-step, as if witnessing an impossible movie scene unfolding in real life. Ethan pulled out his phone and opened his email, his voice calm to the point of being frightening. "I will handle this. Not because it happened to me, but because it has happened to far too many people like me." The white airport lights shone across his face, revealing disappointment, hurt, and the unbreakable resolve of a man who knew he had the power to change everything. As he stepped out of the terminal, the Jacksonville wind hit him hard, tugging at his coat like a flag rising before a new battle. A battle Ethan Carter wouldn't lose, because for the first time in his life, he was not only fighting against a system, he owned it. As the glass terminal doors closed behind Ethan Carter, a cold gust struck his face, carrying a clarity sharp as a blade. In that instant, he felt as if the sky above him were compressing, preparing to burst into a storm that would sweep not only through Skyrise, but across the entire aviation industry. He was not angry, not trembling, not losing control. What he felt was a terrifying kind of silence, the silence of a man who had been patient his entire life, but now knew that if he did not act immediately, thousands of other passengers would continue to endure the same humiliation he had just faced. The first call he made was not to legal, not to human resources, not to communications. It was to Carmen Ellis. "Are you in a meeting?" Ethan asked, his voice so calm that Carmen instantly sensed danger. "Yes, I will step out now. No need." Ethan replied, "I am coming. Call the entire leadership team together within 40 minutes. Carmen paused. "Ethan, what happened?" "Something," he said slowly. "Something I have tried to avoid my entire life. But if it happened today, on my own airline, then I need to fix it at the root." He hung up and headed toward the taxi stand. But just as he raised his hand, his phone vibrated again, non-stop. "Messages from the media, Mr. Carter. We heard a rumor you were removed from flight 227. We need confirmation. Messages from a NorthJet technician. Boss, is it true? A message from Emily. His daughter, Dad, are you okay? I saw the video." Video. Ethan froze for a moment. He opened the app. In only 43 minutes since he stepped off the plane, the hashtag Flight 227 had climbed into the top 10 trending searches. One passenger had recorded Andrew whispering to the flight attendant. Another had captured Dennis approaching Ethan's seat. A third had filmed Ethan standing up, eyes calm but heavy with hurt. All the clips had been stitched into a 54-second video spreading like wildfire. 200,000 views, 700,000, 1.4 million. Ethan stood in the middle of the airport as the neon lights reflected across his face in the phone screen. In his eyes was pain, but no trace of defeat. A group of passengers walking by recognized him. A middle-aged woman approached and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I saw the video. What they did to you was wrong. We are with you." Ethan nodded gratefully and walked out of the terminal, but his footsteps were no longer those of a CEO on a business trip. They were the steps of a man about to begin a historic battle. The emergency meeting at Skyrise headquarters. When Ethan entered the large conference room, every gaze locked onto him, a mixture of shock, fear, and expectation. No one sat. Everyone stood. Not out of formality, but because the atmosphere was too heavy for anyone to rest. Carmen approached him and placed a steady hand on his arm as if shielding him. "We stand with you, no matter what happens." Ethan nodded, then surveyed the room. "The video is spreading fast," Raymond reported, "projected to hit 3 million views within the next hour." The press is reaching out, Elena added. Some networks will run the story in 15 minutes. Employees are worried, Quincy said. They fear this will damage your entire reform movement. Ethan raised his hand, signaling silence. He stood in the center of the room, breath-steady eyes as sharp as steel. If this is the moment that defines the future of Skyrise, he began, then we will not let prejudice define it. The room held its breath. Ethan picked up a marker and wrote on the board, Apex Equity Initiative, the largest anti-bias program ever conceived in the history of aviation. An initiative he had imagined, but never expected to launch this soon. Starting today, Ethan said, voice ringing with power. Skyrise will become the first airline in America to establish a complaint handling system that protects fairness for every passenger, no matter who they are. He listed each point with precision, firing them straight into the heart of the old system. Any passenger being complained about will be given a chance to speak before action is taken. Bias is not a valid justification for enforcement. 3, all passenger removal cases must be reported transparently. 4 employees have the right to refuse directives rooted in discrimination. 5, an independent board will oversee all such incidents. 6, every employee, from cabin crew to executives, must undergo bias recognition training. 7, vulnerable passengers must be protected, not treated as a problem. Silence fell so deep it felt physical. Elena finally spoke, her voice unsteady with emotion. Ethan, this will change everything. Quincy narrowed his eyes. But the industry will push back hard. Other airlines will not want us ahead of them. Ethan replied instantly. Good. I am not here to be liked. I am here to fix what is broken. Carmen looked at him for a long time before saying, Ethan, this morning, they removed you from a seat. But right now you are pulling an entire industry out of the shadows. Ethan gazed toward the glass wall, where the late afternoon sky glowed a deep, breathtaking blue. No one should ever be treated the way I was treated today, he said softly. And if I have the power to change that, then I will not hesitate. The first wave of reactions. Within 3 hours of the meeting's end, the media erupted. Black CEO removed from his own airline's flight. Skyrise prepares full policy overhaul after flight. 227 scandal. Ethan Carter vows to fight discrimination in aviation. Millions of comments flooded social media. Half were furious about the injustice. Half were proud of the way Ethan stood up. But beyond the media storm, Ethan stood alone in his office, hands braced on the desk, eyes closed for a single brief second. Just 1 second to allow himself to feel the true pain of that morning. 1 second to acknowledge he was tired, that he was hurt, that he was human. Then he opened his eyes, and the look there was no longer the look of a man pulled from his seat. It was the look of a man about to lift an entire industry to a new level. Ethan whispered, "Tomorrow we begin." And the sky, the same sky that humiliated him that morning, now waited for him to rise again in a way no one had ever dared before. Within 48 hours of Ethan Carter announcing the Apex Equity Initiative, America erupted, like a pot boiling over, with the lid suddenly blown off. News channels ran non-stop coverage, talk shows debated fiercely, and social media split into opposing waves of hashtags, "Stand with Ethan Fair Skies," "Stop Race Baiting." But Ethan had expected this. When he chose to confront the bias woven deeply into an entire industry, he knew some people would support him, and many others would treat his actions as a declaration of war. And just as predicted, the backlash came faster than any forecast. A group of conservative shareholders issued a warning letter saying Skyrise was taking on too much risk and demanded the reform programs be paused. Some political commentators accused Ethan of turning himself into a victim for publicity. Some passengers even declared they would switch airlines because they did not want to be lectured about fairness every time they fly. But Ethan did not let those voices sway him, because at the same moment, a tidal wave of support poured in like a summer storm. Thousands of flight attendants from other airlines sent emails thanking him for saying what they had always been afraid to say. Civil rights groups launched campaigns urging the public to support Skyrise. Countless passengers who had faced discrimination shared videos telling their stories, many of them painful to watch. The message that moved Ethan the most came from Emily Dad. I am proud of you, but please protect yourself too. A simple text, but heavy enough to tighten his chest, because he knew his daughter feared the storm would consume him. But Ethan did not retreat. Instead, he walked straight into the heart of the storm. He appeared on a national evening news program, seated across from a host, known for aggressive, confrontational interviews. She fired question after question at him. Do you think you are dividing the aviation industry? Are you using your experience to gain media sympathy? Are you concerned this will make white passengers feel unfairly targeted? Ethan looked directly into the camera, his voice slow but powerful. I am not fighting against anyone. I am fighting against bias. And bias has no color. It only has consequences. If aviation becomes fairer for everyone, everyone will fly safer and happier. I am not seeking universal approval. I am seeking real change. The clip spread across social media, shared hundreds of thousands of times. But change does not come from words alone. It comes from action. And Ethan acted relentlessly. He launched bias training for more than 12,000 employees. He approved the replacement of 40 aging aircraft. He restructured internal policies from complaint procedures to how vulnerable passengers were identified and supported. He held nationwide town halls in Denver, Dallas, Orlando, Phoenix, and Salt Lake City. At every stop, employees stood up to share stories of moments when they were told to do things that felt wrong, when they saw passengers treated unfairly, when they were too afraid to speak because they feared losing their jobs. For the first time, they were allowed to speak. A flight attendant named Valerie broke into tears as she said, I once saw a Muslim woman asked to change seats because a passenger said she looked suspicious. I wanted to object, but I was scared. Now I am not scared anymore. Because of you. Ethan stepped off the stage and embraced Valerie like a comrade on a battlefield. But every battle invites a counterstrike. Several major airlines quietly lobbied the FAA to review the policies Ethan was proposing. Some communications executives spread rumors that Skyrise was becoming too sensitive, too political, too risky. Worst of all, a group of former shareholders sent a formal warning threatening to withdraw investment if Ethan continued pushing equality beyond a reasonable limit. Carmen handed him the email at midnight. They want you to back down, she said. Ethan skimmed the letter, once then tore it in half. If they want to leave because I protect my passengers, then they never deserved to be here in the first place. Carmen said nothing, but her eyes shone with pride, and amidst all the chaos, the first results began to appear thin rays of light piercing through the darkness. Passenger complaints dropped dramatically. Passenger removal incidents fell by more than 20%. Employee surveys reporting feeling respected and heard rose by nearly 40%. Civil rights organizations praised Ethan as the most courageous aviation reformer in modern American history. But to Ethan, success was not in the numbers. True success was in the message he received from a stranger at the end of the month. "Thank you. My son is autistic. We were once removed from a flight because they said he was too loud." Today, a Skyrise flight attendant sat beside him, gave him a pillow, and told him, "You are okay. The sky belongs to all of us." For the first time, we felt like we belonged. Ethan read that message and could not speak. Not because it hurt, but because it gave him hope, the very thing he had fought to restore. Skyrise was changing. The world was changing, and Ethan knew the battle would be long. But he would not stop. Not while people were still treated unfairly in the skies he was fighting to make safer and more just. Not while the wound of Flight 227 still ached in his chest. And certainly not when he knew this truth: the sky only truly belongs to everyone when someone brave enough stands up to lead the way. 6 months after the storm called Skyrise, the American sky was no longer what it used to be, and Ethan Carter stood before the window on the 42nd floor of Skyrise headquarters in Chicago, watching aircraft bearing the company's new twin-wing emblem lift off, carrying something far greater than passengers or revenue. A promise of a future where no one would ever be forced out of the seat they paid for because of their skin color, their religion, or a face that made someone feel uncomfortable. But Ethan did not allow himself to bask in victory. He understood one truth deeply: every step forward could be pulled backward the moment people stopped staying vigilant. The conference room door opened, and Carmen walked in, a file in her hand. "The end-of-quarter report is ready," she said. Ethan took it, eyes scanning the numbers quickly until his heartbeat rose. Revenue up 13%, employee retention at the highest level in the company's history, passenger satisfaction among the top in the market. But what made him stop entirely was the last line. System-wide discrimination-related complaints down 28%. A quiet sigh of relief escaped his chest, but before he could respond, his phone vibrated. A message from Emily: "Dad, I just watched a video online. They said Skyrise is the airline leading the transformation of the entire industry. My classmates are using your case study at school. I am so proud of you." Ethan looked at the message, and his eyes stung unexpectedly. He replied, "Thank you, sweetheart. But I didn't do this for recognition. I did it so kids like you can grow up in a fairer world." Emily responded instantly, "I know, and I will continue your work." Ethan smiled softly, warmth filling his chest, a feeling that felt like both a reward and a reminder of the responsibility he still carried. That afternoon, Ethan attended the National Aviation Conference, where CEOs from across the country gathered. When he walked in, many faces turned toward him. Some nodded respectfully. Others avoided his eyes. These were the ones who had publicly opposed him, the ones who had called his reforms naive, unrealistic, even dangerous. But now the numbers spoke louder than any opinion, and they could no longer ignore them. A reporter approached him, calling out, "Mr. Carter, do you think Skyrise's changes will pressure the entire industry to follow?" Ethan paused, looking straight into the camera, as if addressing everyone watching. "I am not forcing anyone to follow," he said. "But when a system allows innocent people to be treated unfairly, we no longer have the right to stand still. If Skyrise can change, every airline can." The quote aired on national television within minutes and spread across social media like a bell ringing through a sleeping industry. That night, back in his apartment, Ethan opened his laptop to answer emails and noticed a new message from Tamara, the gate agent who had moved him so deeply during the incident months earlier. "Mr. Carter," she wrote, "I just wanted to tell you that my daughter Jessica was officially assigned her first project at the aerospace lab at Georgia Tech. She said that one day she wants to design a new aircraft line for Skyrise. She told me, I want to build something that can fly because Mr. Carter taught me that people can fly too. I want you to know that sometimes one right action can change the future of an entire family." Ethan read every word slowly, then placed a hand over his face, laughing softly as he tried to steady the emotions rising inside him. He did not need awards. He did not need praise. He did not need magazine covers. Messages like this was the real victory, a young girl believing that her future was limited, not by prejudice, but only by her dreams. And as he turned off the lights and prepared for bed, the city lights reflected through the window like thousands of stars trapped inside the modern world. He thought of his father, the man who once told him justice doesn't appear on its own. It is built by those patient enough to create it and brave enough to defend it. "I'm doing it, Dad," Ethan whispered. "I am continuing your part." And that night, for the first time in many months, he slept deeply, because he knew he had done something many before him could not, and many after him would continue widening the sky so that everyone could finally have a place to belong. From the perspective of an expert in organizational culture and social justice, Ethan Carter's journey reveals a timeless truth. Systems only change when someone is brave enough to question them, strong enough to endure the pain, and determined enough to turn that pain into the power to protect others. Skyrise did not simply change policy, it changed the way an entire industry views human dignity. And that is the essence of modern leadership, not power, but responsibility. If this story resonates with you, press like to help spread the message that fairness is not a privilege. Subscribe so you do not miss the journeys where kindness and courage take the lead. And leave a comment with the phrase "Kong Bang Truok" to remind each other that the sky only truly belongs to everyone when we choose to protect it together.